Hello, greetings, aloha, shalom, Shabbat shalom. So I'm sitting here with my journal and I wanted to share the writings that I did today, or at least a fraction of it, because otherwise I'd be talking all day on this camera. I do a lot of writing, but the one I want to share is about how to integrate our parts as one unified whole. Because rather than integrating and unifying our parts, we tend to deny certain parts of self. And ultimately, all parts of self can be categorized into the forces of polarity. So masculine and feminine. All of our parts can be categorized under these forces of duality. The ego sees through a vision of duality. So this is the lens that the ego sees through, okay? The ego sees through this lens of duality, whereas the highest self transcends that vision through a unified perspective of these forces of polarity. Ego defines feminine and masculine polarities from separateness consciousness. It can't help but do this because the ego is something that exists because of duality. So it's not a bad thing, but this is how it operates and it needs to be known. Okay, so the ego defines these polarities from separateness consciousness, or, in other words, an incomplete conceptualization. Okay, so the way that it defines these things is not a whole perspective. So how do we bring it to that whole perspective? When the ego does this, it's reflecting that there is still self-doubt or some sort of a disconnect from the truth of oneness. Ego tells a limited narrative about the forces of polarity, which either directly or indirectly, consequently, defines these polarities as they exist in each of the dimensions. We allow, however consciously or not, these definitions of polarity to guide our emotional process, our mental process, our physical process, and ultimately, yes, the spiritual process. The spiritual oscillation of these forces is inevitable, and so it is in all dimensions. There is a divine order within this spiritual oscillation of the polar forces. Absolutely a divine order. There's a pattern in which these forces oscillate. So hopefully we can break free from enslavement of the ego's idea of balance, so that we can be liberated from this false and limited sense of freedom. May we stop resisting our own nature, attempting to micromanage the law. We don't need to play God, as we are, as one, already that. We will only see from this transcendent perspective when we choose to stop telling ourselves narratives about either of the polarities, which are centered in shame, blame, judgment, etc. And this means within ourselves and with others, because all is a reflection of the one self. So when we truly release the shame or judgment of ourselves around both of these polarities, in all of their expressions, when the faces of the forces turn to meet each other with acceptance, compassion, and commitment, only then can we demonstrate balance and maintain this higher state of awareness. So these conflicting parts of self, the masculine and feminine forces, must face each other and make a compromise for the highest good of not just you, but the highest good of the one. This is kind of like an improper use. It's representing an improper use of the justice card. All that the wisdom represents with the justice card about balance and divine order. We keep trying to redefine balance according to egoic thinking. You know, you've heard this before, like, I'm going to give her a taste of her own medicine, or let's fight fire with fire. Or the old saying, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. So we try to play that God or play that judge. And we do it from an incomplete perspective when we do it with the ego alone. The ego needs to remember who it works for, and then everything's all good. If we continue to perceive our life experience from a place that has not been purified and unified, then our reality will continue to reflect pain and suffering, loneliness, a lack of feeling whole. We will judge another in reflection of how we judge ourselves on the inside. We will perceive and speak in a way that reflects an imperfect conception of the truthful union. We will continue to pick each other and self apart until all of reality has been defragmented. And there will we find the truth. So a woman will look at a man and say, he did this thing, or he did that thing. And in our minds, all of our associations with that said thing that we're observing him do, this all creates a complex state of mind. Okay? This all, instead of us just being present and looking at the situation and seeing everybody as equal and just addressing what actually matters, we go into this chaotic state of mind that's entirely unnecessary, because rather than just being present, we judge without realizing it. It's so sneaky how we do this to ourselves, but right away, when we just see someone as the he or she, right then and there, we are limiting our vision, our sight. And then all of our experiences that we associate with whatever it is that he or she is doing, all of those things come up in the minds, and all of those things come into play. Instead, we can use our fullest presence and awareness to observe the whole truth of the situation. What is this person, who is an ever-fluctuating, unique synthesis of the polar forces, doing? So not what is he or she, but what is this being who is made of these polar forces, the same ones you and I are made of? They're constantly changing. What is this ever-changing being doing, and why are they doing it? Okay, unconsciously projecting our limited perspective of the forces onto another is useless, futile. They have their own definitions of these polarities, and we must decode that if we wish to meet them in truth. That's what we have to decode, what their definitions are. Yet in order to decode their definitions, we must set aside our own. And a lot of us don't even realize we have these definitions, so how do we set aside our definitions? If we don't even know how we've defined them so far, we need to really sit with that and examine that. And what are our definitions of polarity, and how has that been defining our entire reality? We must have a foundational understanding, a common denominator in which we can hold up any frequency to, thus revealing its ratio in proportion to the truth. Everything is either for the Creator or it's not. Everything. There's a word for that in Hebrew. It's lishma. That means for the sake of the Creator. And lo lishma means it's not for the sake of the Creator. Everything is one or the other. And when we come to the answer, whether it's for the greatest good or not, the right roles of each polarity in relation to one another are revealed. So first, when we get to this unified vision, when we transcend the duality of the situation to get to that vision of oneness, a lot of people say, oh, well, we can't just leave these bodies and leave this world. Of course not. But we've got to have some guiding truth. We've got to have some foundational wisdom, some foundational system that we can turn to for guidance, lest we become lost in this chaotic realm of material entanglement. So first, yes, we do transcend the duality of the situation in our minds. We can't do that in this body. Yeah, of course not. Of course not. But in our minds, we transcend the duality of the situation, and we come back to that unified perspective where we're not seeing these forces as separate, but rather a harmonious synthesis. And then from there, we can come back down or come back into the body, back into the world of duality, but with a compass, with truth to guide us as to how we can best embody and perceive the masculine and the feminine forces to carry out whatever it is that we need to do. So first we transcend, we gather the wisdom there, and then we take it back and we apply it to our reality. And this symbolism is all in every ancient text. It's in the Bible again and again. You may remember the story of Moses going up to the mountain to receive the tablets, the codes, to bring them back down to the people. It's all symbolism. Many stories saying the same one thing, that we go to these heights, we transcend this world of duality, we go to the heights of the mountain, and there is where we receive wisdom. And then we bring it back to the people. So there's a rise and fall that is written in our blueprint. It's in our DNA from the beginning of all of creation, that rise and fall. And why do we do it? Why do we rise and fall again? To keep reaching ever new heights. to gain that wisdom and bring it back into this world to transform it continuously. That's why we're here. But if we're only seeing things from this separateness consciousness, from the ego's consciousness, and allowing that to dictate what divine order is, we're going to be sadly mistaken, and we are going to have an incomplete strategy, forever leaving a hole that just can't be filled. So instead of saying he did this or she did that, watch where you're defining people and situations. Really pay attention closely, because as soon as you say he or she, right there, all of our ideas about what he or she is, what the masculine or the feminine is, all of those associations arise. Whether or not we like it, that's just how our brain works. So it takes tedious observation and reprogramming to get to this unified perspective, but it's absolutely possible and absolutely necessary if we wish to see real transformation in this world, in this realm of duality. And so watch right away, even if it's just in your mind, or if it's in your words, even better, even more obvious, more concrete proof that we are defining from a place that is not going to get us really anywhere. So pay attention to your words and to your thoughts. How are you defining the situation? What associations are you making to the person, to their choices, to their own beliefs? How are you judging them? How are you judging them? It doesn't make sense. Because really, if we can forget about these forces being these separate entities, and we can for one moment just meditate on what they are as a unified force, these two forces working together, then we can begin to see things very differently. We can say, this is not just he or she doing this thing with all these judgments behind it, but we can say, what is this person doing before my eyes? And how is it either good or not the best for the creator, or for the one, for us all, for the collective? And then our judgment should only be used for service as well. Our judgment should be for the sake of the creator as well. Otherwise, there should be no judgment. It should be like, okay, I'm observing the situation, I'm seeing what this person is doing, I'm judging whether or not it is for the highest, and then I am acting accordingly. So if somebody, for example, is doing something that's not for the highest, rather than sitting there and, complaining about it, or complaining about it to someone else, obviously the right action to take would be to step away from it, to feed the opposite force, to neutralize it immediately in whatever way possible. Not by resisting, because that never works, but by going and being an embodiment of the opposite. So that's really it on that part there. I do have a lot more to share, and I look forward to sharing my journalings with you guys. Thank you for tuning in and listening. I appreciate your feedback, and I appreciate your connection on such subjects, because this is really a collective effort here in doing this kind of work, and really it is work, moving from the separateness consciousness into a new reality that's based on a unified perspective. And again, it's not about transcending these bodies and leaving this world, okay, but it is about going in the mind to that unified perspective. It is about transcendence of the mind. It is absolutely, and that's left out so much in this community of light workers, star seeds, whatever, people doing the transformative work to raise the frequency of this planet. It's important to remember, it's not just, we can't transcend these bodies, we're here and that's it. Yes, but there is a goal to reach each moment, ever higher thoughts, ever higher awareness. So no, we don't transcend these bodies, but we do transcend in the mind. And then we come back to these bodies with that newfound knowledge and wisdom, and we apply it, and we make very real changes. Anyways, I hope you enjoy that. Shabbat Shalom.